Israelis have known for a month now that their Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been questioned in a possible corruption case. This past week, they learned that part of that investigation involves the country's two biggest newspapers and audio tapes that sound like a smoking gun. The two papers are Yedioth Ahronoth, which used to be Israel's most widely circulated publication, and Israel Hayom, a free paper that is now the most widely read in the country, and is a story in and of itself because it is so influential and so pro-Netanyahu that Israelis like to call it Bibiton, Bibi's paper. The audio tapes come from meetings held in 2014 between Netanyahu and Yedioth Ahronoth's owner, Arnon Mozes, who the Prime Minister has often accused of persecuting him. But on the tape, Netanyahu suggests that if Moses and his paper cover him more favorably, his government could find ways of limiting Israel Hayom's distribution, and that would be good for Moses' paper. Benjamin Netanyahu has more than a passing interest in the news media. He doubles as Israel's communications minister, often personally attacks journalists whose work he does not like, and has crafted a narrative that he is the victim of a biased and hostile press. Politicians everywhere try to manipulate the media for their own purposes, but this story puts a master manipulator like Netanyahu on another level. He looks less like a victim of the media and more like a puppet master pulling the strings. Our starting point this week is the Israeli capital, Tel Aviv.
התקשורת בישראל תוקפת את ראש הממשלה יותר מכל תקשורת אחרת בעולם. מה שלא הצליחו לעשות בקלפי, מנסים לעשות בניפוח תקשורתי אדיר. Even the Prime Minister has the right to criticize the press, which I just did.
The bad blood between Netanyahu and all the media is not a new story. It started when he entered politics almost 30 years ago. And this conversation created an earthquake in Israel, mostly because it's two enemies in the political field.
And the new details, and I'm looking at my mobile as we speak, the new details are that Moses, the media magnate, is saying to Netanyahu, I will do anything that you will be the prime minister as long as you want. That's from his side. Prime Minister promises to the publisher, I will make sure that Israel Hayom, the newspaper which is basically a propaganda arm of Netanyahu, will not be a free newspaper anymore, and for this newspaper, it's basically a death verdict.
So we are talking here about the Prime Minister of Israel, who is doing a deal with his most critical rival in the Israeli media at the price of cutting down the newspaper that was created for him.
There were two participants at the meeting in question, two voices on the tape, the Prime Minister and the owner of Yedioth Ahronoth. However, this story is really about another paper, Israel Hayom, which is bankrolled by Sheldon Adelson, an American casino billionaire who started the paper in 2007 when Benjamin Netanyahu was out of office trying to get back in. Israel Hayom is a free paper and from the start was relentlessly pro-Netanyahu. By 2010, just 3 years after launch, it was the country's biggest. Some papers occasionally operate in the red. Israel Hayom lives there. It reportedly loses close to $30 million a year, or, put another way, about 1 Israeli shekel for every paper printed. Clearly, its owner can live with that as part of the price of doing politics, but others cannot. That is why, in 2014, a new piece of legislation came before the Knesset, which would have outlawed money-losing newspapers with political agendas, like Adelson's, as threats to Israel's democracy. But the so-called Israel Hayom law was never passed because Prime Minister Netanyahu called a snap election first.
The timing of the decision to go to election just after the first reading of the Israel Hayom bill, but before the final stages of legislation were moved. The fact that he chose to fire 2 ministers who had supported the legislation ensured the fact that the Knesset would be dissolved and the country would go to elections. That does indicate that this was a major motive for Netanyahu for going to elections at that time.
For Netanyahu, it was a threat for his political life. Just don't touch Israel Hayom. That's basically Netanyahu's logic. So Israel went to elections on the question of media and who gets to control public opinion.
What no one knew until this past week is that in the year prior to that election call, Prime Minister Netanyahu made his offer to Yedioth Ahronoth's owner, Arnon Mozes, that in exchange for more positive coverage, the government would no longer allow Israel Hayom to be a free paper. Even with Sheldon Adelson and the country's most widely read publication firmly in his corner, Netanyahu spends a lot of time complaining about the Israeli media. He has taken to writing letters to reporters he deems hostile, challenging them to make the letters public, and some have. However, the new revelations, the meeting with Moses, the offer made, show the Prime Minister to be more than what he says he is, a victim of biased journalism. Netanyahu offered to alter the country's newspaper landscape to suit his own political agenda, and that's just for starters.
Netanyahu is obsessed over media for many years, and he has a very strong perception on how media should look like. Because of that, he took the position of Minister of Communication. Because of that, he forced all his coalition partners that only what he decides will happen in the field of media, and is really obsessed and determined to implement these changes in media in Israel in order that he will have a larger share of voice and much less strong and independent journalism.
For example, he wants to split down Channel 2, which is too powerful, to two smaller channels. He is trying to destroy or to prevent the launching of the new broadcast corporation, which is supposed to replace Israel Broadcasting Authority, because he's afraid that the new corporation would be less supportive to the government. So there is a sense that he's trying to change the media map in Israel.
Because he knows that there is a large section in the population which doesn't like the media, and he can use that to be seen as the victim.
היחיד שהחליטו לאסור עליו לדבר בתקשורת זה אני.
He can use that to gain more popularity. He can use it to neutralize the media's power. So for all those reasons, whether he actually believes it or whether it's a tactic used, it's still the right thing for him to do.
Which adds another element to the coverage of the corruption investigation of Prime Minister Netanyahu, which was already a tantalizing story for the Fourth Estate. But it's not just about the politician, Israel's media critic-in-chief, and the press barons. Ultimately, this story is about the state of the news media in Israel and the implications for journalists there.
We're talking about Netanyahu and Moses, and it seems like a drama worthwhile watching, as if it's a personal battle between two people. But we really need to think seriously about the implication of what does this story mean? How are information channels, those that are supposed to tell us what's happening, are basically polluted. They are heavily polluted. There are two victims to this scandal. The first one is the public. The second one is the journalists. Where can we work? You know, which media outlet is worthwhile for a journalist to work in? If you want to be a print journalist in Israel, you really don't have a lot of places to go, and that is, I think, a sad thing.